Hello, Canada Files viewers. This is Aidan Jonah, Editor-in-Chief of the Canada Files. I am here co-hosting the next episode of Canada and Palestine, the War on Zionism. I am co-hosting it with Laith Marouf, a broadcasting law consultant with the Community Media Advocacy Center and Senior Director at Free Palestine TV. Laith, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be with you always, Aidan.
I appreciate that for sure. It's great to be with you as well, Laith. So, as always, with this criminal Zionist entity and colonial Canada support for it, there is much to talk about. So, Laith, can you brief Canada's viewers on the situation in Palestine in these last 2 weeks? You know, I think the horrific massacre in the hospital in, if I remember correctly, the West Bank comes to mind, but there's much more to the overall situation. So let's leave it to you.
Yeah, yesterday there was that attack in on a hospital where Israeli undercover Arabized, as they would call them, Arabized Israeli military forces dressed up as Arabs, as doctors, as nurses, went into a hospital in Jenin and assassinated 3 Palestinian youth that were injured on their hospital beds. One of those Palestinian youth was in a coma and was paralyzed from a previous Israeli attack. So, of course, it's a cowardly action, but it is also a war crime to conduct a military operation inside a hospital on injured opponents, as we see. So that's that story. In general, the war and the genocide in Gaza continues. The average is 130 to 250 Palestinian civilians killed. The average of Palestinian children killed every day in Gaza since the beginning of the war supersedes the number of children killed in Auschwitz on a daily basis during the Holocaust. So it is definitely a Holocaust what is being committed in Gaza at the hands of the Zionists. We also know the resistance across the region continues. Here in South Lebanon, the resistance has increased the quantity, quality, and quality of their attacks. For instance, we saw over the last week Hezbollah releasing 2 different videos from new guided missiles that are ATGM-like, that have cameras positioned on them, and they showed us attack on the Miran air control base, which is the main Israeli air control base in the north of Palestine. There's only 2 of them in all of occupied Palestine. And in that video, you could see the destruction of one of the domes for that, for air control. But as that missile was landing on that dome, you could see that all the other facilities in the base were destroyed. Similarly, they released another video of an attack on a Israeli naval control base in Al-Naqoura in the furthest point of occupied Palestine in the north on the Mediterranean, and that shook the Israeli military, and it shook the media, because the Israeli military has been hiding the fact that they're being targeted in such ways, effective ways, by Hezbollah. Finally, we saw the Iraqi resistance constantly attacking American bases in Syria and Iraq, and hitting also the 2 different ports on the Mediterranean that are, Israeli. And of course, they hit an American base right on the border of Syria, but inside Jordanian territory. We heard that they used a drone, killed at least 3 American servicemen and injured tens more. and now we are waiting for the supposed American response attack on the resistance in Iraq. That led to a huge meeting in Iraq where, as the media is reporting here, the Prime Minister of Iraq threatened to resign if the resistance in Iraq doesn't stop targeting American troops. As a result, we heard, we read a statement that was released by Hezbollah Iraq saying that they will cease, for the meantime, attacking American positions. That does not include them stopping to attack Israeli positions in occupied Palestine. And the last thing I'm going to say about the updates is about the battle in Yemen and the seas around Yemen. The Yemeni resistance, of course, hit a British oil tanker that was carrying jet fuel to supply the Israeli Air Force. That tanker was protected by 2 British destroyers, which were not able to protect the tanker, and they had to withdraw in fear of them being hit themselves. And earlier today, the Yemeni resistance announced that they targeted an American destroyer in the Arabian Sea. We don't know what's the extent of damage to that American destroyer, but it's clear that the Yemeni resistance is continuing in its support for the liberation of Palestine and on putting pressure to end the genocide in Gaza. That's the general outlook of what happened over the last 2 weeks.
Thanks, Laith. So before getting to the next section, which of course is how is really Canada helping the Zionist entity, can you give the audience a quick little breakdown of the South African claim against Israel at the ICJ, and what happened there? Was it a victory for South Africa? Important context before we get into everything.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the South African case is asking the court to rule that there's genocide being committed by the Israelis. And this included also like an emergency injunction, kind of a request for a preliminary ruling that genocide may be commissioned at this moment, and therefore to urge the Security Council and the United Nations as a whole to enforce the Genocide Convention and to stop Israel from the continuation of committing genocide in Gaza. There's 15 judges on the court sitting, plus 2 that each of the parties put forward, basically Israel and South Africa. So in total, there's 17. But let's put those 2 on the side for a minute. And what ended up happening is, out of the 9 requests for emergency rulings, 14 out of the 15 judges approved 7 of these emergency injunctions. And the only judge that refused those was an Ugandan judge, and she ruled against everything that South Africa put forward. And that resulted in the Ugandan government making a public statement disowning this judge and reaffirming their support for the liberation of Palestine and an end to the apartheid that is ruling over the Palestinian people. This is very significant, in my opinion, because even the Israeli judge, by the way, approved 2 of the 9 requests for emergency injunction. So this made this Ugandan judge look really bad. But it's also because Uganda, if our viewers don't know, the Zionists in the United States, the evangelicals in the United States invested billions of dollars in Uganda to create a chaos and created the Army of the Lord, a genocidal Christian supremacist group that was killing people all around Uganda and its neighbors. And the intent was to empty this country from its population so they can suck out all the oil of Uganda for the cheapest possible cost. And what, lo and behold, all this investment that the United States and the Zionists put into the Ugandan elite and the corporations that run the government are standing publicly against this judge and against Israel itself. That shows you how the world is changing so drastically now, where countries like Uganda can take such brave actions. Ultimately, it was, personally, I would say, we need to remind our viewers that international law is not de jure, meaning it is not what you adjudicate in court. What court rules doesn't matter in international law. International law is de facto, meaning what can you bring into fact through the power of force? Okay, so the International Court of Justice, let's say, even if it ruled at the end of the day that there is genocide committed against the Palestinians, if there is no Security Council resolution under Chapter 7 that allows the use of force to implement this ruling, it will become just ink on paper. So clearly, those who think that the court is going to liberate Palestinians are mistaken. That's not how international law works. The other thing that we need to look at in this case is by the United States and the West as a whole undermining the court and undermining because the regulations and the laws of war, because international law is de facto, it means ultimately that the Genocide Convention is going to become null if the United States and the Western bloc that is under its rule and Israel refuse to cease the genocide, and nobody can force them to do so, then the Genocide Convention becomes null. And this is ultimately what the West is trying to do in general about international law and the international structures that were built after World War II. They are trying to abandon international law and create this rule-based order, right? When they say that, they mean they want international law to collapse because you can't enforce it anymore. And they, with their force, can enforce this rule-based order that they are imagining, you see? So force is what makes international law into reality. And as this genocide continues, it's putting stress on all this body of law and the organizations that were structured after World War II that are now teetering on the edge of collapse, including the United Nations.
Thanks, Laith. So let's jump in now to my side of things. So after South Africa's case, against Israel in the ICJ in these results so far, you had Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs Melanie Joly issue a statement reasserting Israel's quote-unquote right to self-defense. And even CTV News admits that Canada has actually refused to call on Israel to follow the orders, as it said, set out by the International Court of Justice, as a quote, which are done, of course, with the idea of preventing genocide, even though, of course, genocide has been perpetrated against Palestine since 1948. After the ICJ case and the embarrassment for Israel, Canada cut funding to UNRWA. They had donated $31.85 million in 2022, according to the latest available statistics. And after Operation Al-Aqsa flood, October 7th, Canada had sent an additional $20 million. So that's been suspended. And there's been this targeted Zionist campaign against UNRWA. So I think I'm gonna have to get you to come in again, Laith. Why are the Zionists so obsessed with UNRWA?
Because UNRWA has been the lifeline for Palestinian refugees around the world for decades, since 1948. It provides healthcare, it provides education, it provides jobs for Palestinians in those fields where Palestinians teach their, in these schools, the history of their own people and their oppression. And so, of course, without the existence of UNRWA, you will have millions of Palestinians with no health care and no education, and nobody to support them. Their body and their mind will not be healthy enough to be able to resist genocide and colonization. So for decades, the Zionists have been attempting to destroy UNRWA. And of course, some of your viewers may remember Trump a few years ago cut the funding of UNRWA, which put a lot of stress on that organization for almost 2 years until Biden came in and re-engaged the funding for UNRWA. The other thing is that it's also important to understand, why do we have UNRWA when we have actually another United Nations refugee agency? Why is there a separate organization for the Palestinians? And that comes back to 1948, when the United States and the Israelis themselves did not want to allow the Palestinians to be part of the greater refugee organization's support. On the one hand, to be able not to, to claim that, well, they're not really refugees. That's why they're not in this organization. The other is because in 1948, the International Refugee Organization, that was part of the United Nations, its main work was to support the Jewish refugees inside Europe. And this International Refugee Organization was working to repatriate Jewish refugees to their original countries in Europe. Now, can you imagine if that same organization that was trying to repatriate Jewish refugees to their original homelands in Europe was also working on Palestinian refugees to repatriate them, give them the right of return? So that is the reason we have UNRWA. That's why Palestinians are in this situation, and also, of course, to allow the West, as we see today, to punish the Palestinian refugees at will without harming their other projects working on refugees. If this was one organization servicing all refugees on this planet, and the Americans attempted to cut its funding just to punish the Palestinians, you would have seen, of course, all the countries in the world standing up against that, because it will be harming many more issues. So the isolation of the Palestinians is the goal. Making them, in this situation, cutting the funding to UNRWA in the middle of a genocide where the population in Gaza is at the edge of starvation, mass starvation. What Canada did, what the United States did, what the Western countries that also cut the funding to UNRWA did, is they now have engaged directly in the commission of genocide. We could argue before this cutting of UNRWA that the United States and Canada supplying the arms and doing all this political support to Israel during the genocide, that they were aiding and abetting the commission of genocide. Now they are engaged directly in the commission of genocide because of the deliberate starvation of Palestinians in Gaza with this cutting of the money of UNRWA.
Thanks for that context, Laith. So let's shift to some other issues. You had a man in Toronto, actually, getting arrested for holding up the flag of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. This communist Palestinian resistance group is on Canada's terrorist list, which of course is really, it's a joke. And I've written about that before. So people can be charged for publicly supporting or fundraising for them. So that's one piece of news. You also had CBC News reporting that Palestinians seeking refuge in Canada, they face very deep scrutiny from immigration officials. The cap is currently around 1,000. I was seeing some news in the last day or two that because of the people in occupied Palestine, a lot of them can't actually get out. So I think it was 967 was the last number I saw, and they're not actually even bringing on anymore. They might not even make it to 1,000. But even these 1,000 are being intensely scrutinized. And you want to know who isn't being scrutinized? Who hasn't been scrutinized throughout after World War II? Nazis, fanatical anti-communists, the kind of people that lynched Jews, for example, in Hungary. Every assorted bit of anti-communists were eagerly allowed into this bastard country, But don't worry, the evil Palestinians that don't want to get genocided, it just lays bare the brutal colonial nature of the Canadian state. I can't put it any other way. It's just horrifying. And I mean, even look, after Russia's special military operation started, Canada rolled the red carpet down for Ukrainian immigrants, and not all of them, support the Ukrainian fascist regime that's in power. But at the end of the day, right, they're brought in for cheap labor, and B, because they're likely to be an anti-communist and also this kind of anti-imperialist bloc, being against them. And they're another bulwark against that, right? And so it's all about protecting the interests, and that's why Palestinians get scrutiny and other groups, frankly, don't. And it's just a joke. It's a terrible indictment on what this Canadian state is. And so, speaking of Canada and genocide, you had a Canadian outlet, The Maple. They revealed that, quote, Trudeau government admits it authorized new military exports to Israel after October 7th. And now in this article, it said that the GAC, Global Affairs Canada, had said that that Canada, they were claiming that it was just non-lethal. But there's good points made that you can have non-lethal elements being used in weapons or other lethal armaments, etc. So it doesn't really inspire much confidence there. So, we could go on for hours about Canada's support for the Zionist regime, but we need to run a tight ship here. So now we're going to shift gears, and we're going to go to the question of how are Canadians opposing Canada's support for the Zionist entity. And so a shout out for the Canada Files and fantastic reporting from Canada Files reporter Martad Umakiaba, because he revealed that Canadian lawyers are investigating the actions of Canadian special forces in occupied Palestine, and they've actually this firm, law firm, Hamid Law, they've sent a notice of intent to prosecute to a couple Canadian government officials. They're conducting a broader investigation. Now, I also saw that I believe it was Al-Haq and one other group had also filed against the Canadian government. It might have been a notice of intent to prosecute. Don't quote me there. So you have another case of Canadian government officials potentially coming under the question of law on that genocide and so forth. You have some Canadians in Hamilton, Ontario, on the positive note, protesting on January 20th to condemn Canada's participation in Operation Prosperity Guardian, and they praised Ansarallah's blockade of Israeli ships in the Red Sea. You also had some controversy. I saw it in the National Post, that rag. They had some of these Zionist members of union complaining. I believe it was the OPSU flag was seen at a protest that also was speaking positively about Ansarallah's blockade on Israeli ships in the Red Sea. So you had these two big elements come up. And on the organizing front, there's actually some good news, which is that there is a Toronto chapter of Sami Doom. having been set up. Their first statement was released on January 24th, and it was all about heightened police repression against Palestine solidarity protesters. So on the organizing front, there's a bit of a boost there. And the most embarrassing thing for the Canadian state recently has actually been the National Council of Canadian Muslims. They actually refused to meet with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, which is a rather massive step because they are a very, very liberal organization, a very liberal organization. So them taking that step indicates how much the Canadian government's reputation has just cratered and is careening off a cliff over their support for the Zionist entity's genocide. So, Trudeau had actually gone to some sort of building in Gatineau, Quebec, and he was there and he got some photo ops with some folks. This was around the massacre in 2017, the anti-Muslim massacre. After going in there, getting his photo ops, Trudeau was actually accosted by pro-Palestine protesters, and he was forced to flee into a car. There's a quote from a Telegram post from Murtad Umakiabid for the Canada Files that I like, and I'll read it out for people. When leaving the building, pro-Palestine activists shamed Trudeau, who was chased into his car. His security formed a barrier so he could escape. Will his entourage protect him from The Hague? Stay tuned. I like that, and I thought people should hear it. So yeah, those are some of the quick fire elements of this resistance. Laith, if you want to bring anything up, now's the great time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously tens of demonstrators across Canada have been already arrested. Some of them knocking on their door at 3 in the morning or breaking the doors on them, the police, and laying these ridiculous charges. By the way, carrying a flag of anybody is not an illegal thing in Canada. You can carry the flag of the PLFP, you can carry the flag of Hamas and Hezbollah. This is not a crime under the law. What is a crime, as you mentioned, is to belong to this group and or support it financially. And of course, we know that the PLFP and none of these resistance groups are actual quote-unquote terrorists. But I would say, looking at how these the NCCM responded now, it is a very good thing. It's a change in attitude within the structured Muslim organizations in Canada. We have to look at it as part of a wave. Look at what's happening in the United States, where the Arab and Muslim communities in Michigan have refused to meet with Biden till today. And this includes the Speaker of the House of the Michigan Congress, who is an Arab, who's the highest, serving Democrat in Michigan, saying that they refuse to meet with Biden. So we can see how now the will of the Arab and Muslim community for the first time is affecting their own organizations that have been liberal in general and in the pocket of the Democrats or the Liberal Party. But now what is going to happen? This is what we have to think about a little bit for the future, a little bit further as these elections in the United States and Canada and the UK roll out. They're all going to happen this year. The Arab, the Palestinian, the Arab, the Muslim communities, and all those who support the rights of the liberation of Palestine are currently orphans. They're orphans politically. There is no political party in Canada that is in the parliament or in the United States or in the UK who is anti-Zionist. What does this mean? That means that, we're talking about in a country like Canada, 20% of the population at least is being told, you will not have political representation. We will refuse you. And the political parties, like in the United States and Canada and the UK, they will be going into an election where they will be competing on who is more Zionist, who is more supportive of Jewish white supremacy, who is more supportive of killing Palestinians and genociding them. And therefore, the populations in Canada, the US, and England have to, right now, before we get too close to these elections, realize that and look to creating either their own political parties or taking over one of them, because all of them in general are taken over by the Zionists. If they don't have the capabilities to come together with their allies, the other racialized indigenous nations and all those Canadian citizens, American citizens, and UK citizens of consciousness to put forward a political alternative, whatever comes from these elections will be even worse than what it is today.
Thanks, Laith. And almost as if to emphasize that point, I think it needs to be mentioned that Canada's main opposition leader, Conservative Party leader, Pierre Poilievre, actually called UNRWA a terrorist organization. So every single existing parliamentary party, as you said, is competing to be who can be more Zionist. There isn't a genuine option within the parliament, and if change is going to come, people are going to have to step away from precedent of complicity, of complacency, of cowardice, frankly, and they're going to have to find something new within themselves to oppose this Canadian support for the Zionist regime. So we'll see if that happens. We certainly will. And I think that's a great point to leave off this episode. So, Laith, my co-host, thank you for being there with me in the second episode of Canada and Palestine, the War on Zionism. Canada Files viewers, if you want to support this journalism and you aren't already a monthly or annual financial supporter, please consider joining 82 other folks in doing this. Your help to this journalism is much appreciated, and this battle against Zionism, more than anything, let's hope the people can win this battle, because the Palestinian resistance is fighting, the peoples of the global south are fighting. Let's step up our game each and every day and join them in that fight. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.